His work essentially consists of restoring and automating old clocks. They called Alfredo, the clockmaker, to restore the old mechanism that stopped striking the hours on the bell some years ago. When the clock arrives at the workshop, all the parts are dirty and rusty. Alfredo disassembles them, one by one, to clean them and check for damage. Each clock requires separate treatment so that the mechanisms of one do not get mixed up with those of another. With a special solvent, this craftsman cleans the dirt from all the parts in the wash basin. He then checks for wear and breakage in each of the pinions, eccentrics, hubs, teeth, axles and bushings. Using a wire brush, the clockmaker finishes removing all the dirt from the parts, especially the dirt stuck between the teeth of the pinions. This is done just to check the wear and tear. Alfredo checks on the lathe if the axles are twisted. If they have any variation, he straightens them with a few light taps of a plastic hammer. Since these axles were turned over 70 years ago, Alfredo sands down the imperfections and burrs from the initial turning, but the most important work of this tower clockmaker and restorer begins now, as he starts to manufacture, one by one, all the pieces that are unusable. The pinions often come out quite deteriorated. This forces the craftsman to remake them. To achieve this, he uses a milling machine with a series of tools called mills. Here, I have the whole system of mills for each pinion that the clock has. The milling machine is automatic. For each type of groove, a different mill is needed. With continuous friction, the diamond-tipped mills cut into the iron until they shape each of the pinion's teeth. Alfredo also has to work at the forge to shape a special steel bar into a spring. Now we are going to stretch the iron. And so, we keep molding until we finish making the spring. He also uses the forge to heat lead in a crucible, which is necessary to fill the counterweights. From the roughness of forging steel with hammer blows, through the primitive process of metal casting, to the precision in adjusting pieces to each other, Alfredo Palas's work retains all the knowledge and flavor of ancient clockmakers. The hand box is a mechanism that Alfredo has to change in almost all the clocks. Being attached to the dial, all the iron parts that make it up have rusted due to lack of periodic lubrication. The clockmaker must machine each of the parts made for him at the foundries using the molds he provided. After sanding and filing the casting burrs, this craftsman drills holes with an auger. With special tools called taps, Alfredo threads the fine internal threads where the screws will go. This is a special grease. Since the dials and hand boxes have to be exposed to the weather, it needs to be special so that it lasts for many years. In this, there are also long and short cannons. When assembling the box, the clockmaker greases each of the pinions and the cannon, which is the piece where the hands are placed. Now this is already greased. We have the hand box finished. Those parts of the clock that are not part of the mechanisms are painted blue to contrast with the red color of the clocks that Alfredo has not restored. The old metal dials, deteriorated by the effects of weather changes, will be replaced by more resistant material. With a compass, the craftsman marks the shape on a methacrylate sheet to cut it later with a mechanical jigsaw. To avoid mistakes, before attaching the numbers and minutes to the dial, he places them in their final positions. It's ready to place it in the frame. The clockmaker permanently mounts the handbox on the dial. From it, the transmission will emerge that precisely turns the clock's two hands. The toothed gears are the heart of these time-measuring machines. With precision, each part must mesh with the next, and that in turn with another, to ensure the clock is accurate in marking the hours. When the craftsman has repaired or manufactured all the parts the clock needs, it is time for assembly. Once the main parts are anchored on the bench or support, Alfredo begins to place the axles, pinions, eccentrics, bearings, and all those small parts that, in perfect harmony, will set the clock in motion. In this restoration, Alfredo has replaced some mechanical devices with electronic ones. This old system of raising the counterweight with a crank will now be powered by a small motor. It's time to check if the clock works, and for this, it is essential that it is well leveled on its base. Depending on the arrangement of the mechanism, the clock is prepared to strike the quarters, half hours and hours with bell chimes. The municipality that commissioned the clock's restoration has provided Alfredo with everything he needs for this beloved mechanism to return to its rightful place in the tower. It was in 1870 when the Cole brothers founded the first tower clock manufacturing and repair house in Las Celas. After the founders' deaths, Alfredo Palas took over this activity. Today, the ticking of the mechanism, merged with the sounds of the bells announcing the hours, halves and quarters, seems to have stopped the passage of time.